The sun shone brightly over the sprawling estate of Richard Langley, a self-made millionaire whose success was the talk of the entire city. Richard was known not only for his immense wealth, but also for his strict discipline, his sharp business mind, and his deep love for his only son, Nathan. At just 10 years old, Nathan had already been raised with values that his father believed were essential: hard work, respect, and responsibility. But despite all his careful planning, Richard was about to make a decision that would test everything he had worked for. On that particular morning, Richard found himself in a bind. A last-minute business trip had come up, one that he couldn't afford to miss. He had always been cautious about who watched over Nathan, but this time he had no choice. His wife, Nathan's stepmother, Vanessa, was the only available option. Richard hesitated. He knew Vanessa loved luxury, parties, and a carefree lifestyle, but he convinced himself that for just one day, she could manage to be responsible. After all, how much could go wrong in 24 hours? Nathan wasn't thrilled about the arrangement either. He had never been close to Vanessa. Ever since she married his father 2 years ago, he had sensed that she wasn't interested in being a real parent to him. She was beautiful, charming, and always dressed in the finest clothes. But she barely acknowledged him unless his father was around. Richard, however, reassured him. "It's just one day, son. Be good, listen to Vanessa, and I'll be back before you know it." Nathan nodded, but deep inside, he had a bad feeling. As Richard's car disappeared down the long driveway, Vanessa stood by the front door, scrolling through her phone, barely noticing the boy standing next to her. She sighed loudly. "All right, kid, don't make my day difficult. Okay, I have plans." She wasn't planning to spend the day looking after Nathan. Far from it. Her mind was already racing with ideas. A shopping spree? A spa visit? Maybe a lunch date with her? Friends? One thing was certain. Babysitting was not on her agenda. Nathan watched as Vanessa strutted into the house, tossing her designer bag onto the couch. She made a quick call, her voice dripping with excitement. "Of course. I'm free today. Richard's gone. Let's do something fun." She barely noticed Nathan as she disappeared into her room, leaving him standing there, unsure of what to do. An uneasy silence settled over the mansion. Nathan wasn't sure how to spend his day, but something told him he should stay out of Vanessa's way. He wandered into the backyard, kicking at the pebbles near the pool. His father had always told him that responsibility meant doing what was right, even when no one was watching. But what happened when someone who was supposed to be responsible simply didn't care? Hours passed, and Vanessa didn't check on Nathan, even once. Instead, she had invited a few of her closest friends over. They lounged by the pool, sipping expensive cocktails, laughing and gossiping as if they didn't have a care in the world. The music blared loudly, drowning out the quiet tension that hung in the air. Nathan sat in the corner, unnoticed, as the women enjoyed themselves. Then, things started to get out of hand. One of Vanessa's friends suggested they take the party elsewhere, somewhere more exciting. "Let's go downtown," she said, giggling. "No one will know. It's not like Richard's here." Vanessa hesitated for a moment. She glanced at Nathan, who was watching them with wide eyes. Leaving him alone wasn't part of the plan. But then again, she figured he'd be fine. It was just for a little while. He was old enough to entertain himself. Besides, she didn't want to miss out on a good time. With a careless shrug, Vanessa made her decision. "All right, let's go," she said, grabbing her purse. Then she turned to Nathan. "Listen, I'll be back soon. Just, I don't know, watch TV or something." Nathan stared at her in shock. "You're leaving? Don't be so dramatic," she said, rolling her eyes. I'll be back before you know it." And with that, she was gone. Nathan stood frozen, watching as Vanessa and her friends disappeared out the front door, their laughter echoing down the hall. The massive house suddenly felt too big, too empty. He had never been left alone like this before. His father always made sure someone responsible was with him, but now he was completely on his own. At first, he tried to stay calm. He told himself it wasn't a big deal. He could just watch a movie, read a book, or maybe play some video games. But as the minutes turned into hours, the unease in his stomach grew stronger. The sun was beginning to set, and Vanessa still hadn't returned. Then, something happened that made Nathan's blood run cold. A strange noise echoed from the front of the house. A sharp knock at the door, followed by the sound of footsteps. Nathan's heart pounded. He wasn't expecting anyone. He tiptoed toward the window and peeked outside. A man stood on the porch, glancing around suspiciously. Nathan had never seen him before. The man knocked again, harder this time. Nathan took a step back, his hands shaking. He didn't know what to do. Should he answer? Should he hide? His father had always told him never to open the door for strangers. But the man wasn't leaving, and then the front door handle began to turn. Nathan's breath caught in his throat. The door was locked, wasn't it? Panic surged through him as he realized he wasn't sure. Had Vanessa locked the door before she left? His mind raced as the handle rattled again. The man outside let out a frustrated sigh. "I know someone's in there," he muttered. Nathan backed away slowly. His heart was pounding so hard it hurt. He needed to do something, fast. But before he could move, the man did something that sent a jolt of fear through Nathan's entire body. He reached into his pocket and pulled out something small and metallic. Nathan's breath hitched. The man was trying to pick the lock. And at that moment, Nathan realized the truth. He was completely alone, and he was not safe. What happens next? Will Nathan find a way to protect himself? Will Vanessa return in time, or will she regret the careless decision she made? Stay tuned to find out. Nathan's entire body tensed as he watched the man outside fiddle with the lock. He knew he had to act fast. His father had always taught him to be cautious. But this wasn't just about being careful. This was about survival. He glanced around the room, searching for something, anything that could help him. His mind raced through everything he knew about the house, the security system, the emergency numbers, where to hide. The problem was, Vanessa had turned off the alarm earlier when her friends arrived, complaining that it kept beeping. And now the house was wide open, vulnerable. Nathan cursed under his breath. He had never felt more alone in his life. The door handle jiggled again, more aggressively this time. The man outside muttered something under his breath, frustration creeping into his voice. Nathan's pulse pounded in his ears. He needed to get away from the entrance, fast, turned and darted toward the staircase, his bare feet making almost no sound against the polished floor. He needed a place to hide. The upstairs bedrooms. No, too obvious. The study? Too open. Then he remembered. His father's office. It had a heavy wooden desk, large enough for him to squeeze under. And more importantly, it had a landline. His heart hammered in his chest as he slipped into the office and shut the door as quietly as he could. He grabbed the phone and frantically dialed his father's number. It rang, and rang, and rang. "Come on, Dad. Pick up," he whispered, gripping the receiver tightly. But there was no answer. Nathan felt his stomach drop. He tried again. This time dialing his father's assistant, then the house security company. But it was no use. The calls wouldn't go through. Vanessa must have disconnected the landline as well. A new kind of fear gripped Nathan now. Not just fear of the man outside, but fear of the fact that no one knew he was in danger. He was on his own. Downstairs, he heard the front door creak. His breath caught. The lock. It had been picked. Nathan clamped a hand over his mouth to keep from making a sound. His heart raced as he heard slow, deliberate footsteps echo through the hallway. The intruder was inside. The man didn't speak. He moved with a quiet confidence, like he knew exactly what he was looking for. Nathan could hear drawers being opened, furniture shifting slightly as the man searched. Nathan squeezed his eyes shut. He needed a plan. He tried to recall everything his father had ever taught him about emergencies. He knew there was a hidden panic button in the house, somewhere. His father had shown it to him once, but he hadn't been paying much attention back then. He had never imagined he would need it. The footsteps grew closer. Nathan held his breath. The door to the office rattled. The intruder was checking each room, one by one. Nathan's mind screamed at him to run, but his body wouldn't move. His fingers dug into the carpet as he tried to steady his breathing. Then, the footsteps moved past. Nathan exhaled shakily. Maybe the intruder wouldn't check the office. Maybe he would grab whatever he was looking for and leave. But just as that thought crossed his mind, he heard something that made his stomach churn. A voice, not the intruder's, Vanessa's. Her voice echoed from the hallway, coming from the intruder's phone. It was a voicemail, but Nathan could still make out the words. "Listen, just take whatever you want and get out. I don't care what you do, but make sure the kid doesn't call anyone. I can't have Richard finding out." Nathan's body went cold. This wasn't just some random break-in. Vanessa had sent this man, his stepmother, the woman his father trusted to look after him, had planned this. Nathan felt sick. His thoughts spun in circles. Why would she do this? Was this about money? Did she want to scare him? Or worse? The sound of a drawer slamming shut pulled him back to the moment. The intruder had found something. A safe. Papers. Nathan didn't know. He had to act now. He scanned the office, desperately, his eyes landing on something near the bookshelf. His father's emergency panic button. His heart leaped. He had found it. But pressing it meant making a noise. He hesitated. The intruder was still in the house. If Nathan made a sound, he'd be caught. But if he didn't, there was no telling what would happen next. He reached for the button, fingers shaking. Then, a loud crash came from the front of the house. The intruder swore under his breath. Something had startled him. Nathan didn't wait to find out what it was. He slammed his hand onto the panic button. A shrill alarm blared through the house. Piercing through the silence, the intruder cursed. Heavy footsteps pounded against the floor as he ran toward the exit. Nathan could hear the front door burst open, followed by the sound of a car speeding away. Then, silence. Nathan sat there, frozen, barely able to believe what had just happened. The alarm was still ringing, but he could hear the distant sound of sirens approaching. Help was on the way, but one thought refused to leave his mind. Vanessa had betrayed him, and soon, his father would know the truth. The sound of sirens grew louder, cutting through the stillness of the night. Nathan remained hidden under the desk, his heart pounding even though he knew the danger had passed. He could still hear the alarm blaring, but everything else felt distant, like he was stuck in a bad dream he couldn't wake up from. His mind kept replaying Vanessa's voice from the intruder's phone. She had planned this. She had sent that man. A knock on the front door made him jolt. "Police? Is anyone inside?" A firm voice called out. Nathan took a shaky breath and forced himself to move. His legs felt weak as he crawled out from under the desk and made his way downstairs. When he reached the door, he hesitated for a moment before unlocking it. The moment it swung open, 2 officers stepped inside. Their faces softened when they saw him. "Are you all right, son?" one of them asked. Nathan nodded, but his voice barely came out. "Someone broke in," he managed to say. "And my stepmother, she—" He swallowed hard, trying to push down the lump in his throat. "She was part of it." The officers exchanged a glance. "You're safe now," the other one reassured him. "Where's your father?" "He's out of town," Nathan said, his voice small. "I tried to call, but the phone wasn't working." One of the officers radioed for backup, while the other knelt down in front of Nathan. "We'll get in touch with him, okay? Just sit tight." As they began checking the house, the reality of what had happened started to settle in. Nathan wasn't just scared. He was angry. Angry that Vanessa had betrayed his father's trust. Angry that she had put him in danger without a second thought. Angry that, even now, she was probably out having fun, thinking she had gotten away with it, but she hadn't. Because just then, the front door burst open again. This time, it wasn't the police. It was Richard. His face was pale, his usual composed expression replaced with sheer panic. "Nathan!" he called out. Nathan barely had time to react before his father was kneeling beside him, gripping his shoulders tightly. "Are you okay? What happened?" His voice was sharp, filled with urgency. Nathan felt a rush of relief at seeing him, but his emotions were too tangled to process. Instead, the words just spilled out. "Dad, Vanessa, she planned this," he said, his voice shaking. "She sent that man. I heard her on the phone. She told him to take whatever he wanted, and to make sure I didn't call anyone." Richard froze. For a moment, it was like he hadn't fully processed the words. Then, something in his expression changed. His jaw clenched, his hands tightening slightly on Nathan's arms. "Are you sure?" Nathan nodded, his eyes pleading. For his father to believe him, Richard slowly stood up, his face darkening with an anger Nathan had never seen before. "Where is she?" he asked the officers. One of them spoke up. "We're tracking her now. If what your son is saying is true, she'll be facing serious charges." Nathan watched as his father took a deep breath, running a hand over his face. He looked exhausted, like the weight of betrayal had just hit him all at once. But when he turned back to Nathan, his expression softened. "I'm so sorry," he said quietly. "I should have never left you with her." Nathan shook his head. "I didn't think she'd do this either," he admitted. I knew she didn't care about me, but I didn't think she'd go this far." Richard pulled him into a tight hug, holding him close. "It's over now," he said, his voice steadier this time. "You're safe. That's all that matters." But it wasn't quite over yet. Just then, one of the officers got a message on his radio. "We've located her," he announced. "She was spotted at a high-end restaurant downtown. Officers are moving in now." Nathan saw his father's expression harden. There was no relief in his eyes, just quiet determination. "I want to be there when she's arrested," he said. Nathan wasn't sure if it was a good idea, but he also knew there was no stopping his father. And maybe, deep down, he wanted to see it happen too. A short time later, they arrived at the restaurant. The scene was almost surreal. Vanessa sat at a table with a glass of wine in her hand, laughing, with her friends, completely unaware of what was coming. She didn't even look up when the officers entered. Then, one of them approached her. "Vanessa Langley." She turned, an annoyed expression on her face. "Yes?" You're under arrest for conspiracy to commit a crime, endangering a minor, and aiding in a burglary." The color drained from her face. "What?" she sputtered. "That's ridiculous. I don't know what you're talking about." Nathan and his father watched from the doorway as the officers placed her in handcuffs. Vanessa's eyes darted around frantically until they landed on Richard. Her face twisted into something desperate. "Richard, you don't believe this, do you?" Richard took a slow step forward, his expression unreadable. "You put my son in danger," he said, his voice low but firm. "You were supposed to take care of him, and instead, you nearly destroyed everything." Vanessa shook her head wildly. "It wasn't like that. I didn't think he'd actually go through with it. She stopped, realizing she had just confessed. The officers wasted no time leading her out. As she passed Nathan, her gaze flickered to him for just a second, but there was no regret there, only anger, as if she was blaming him for getting caught. Nathan just stared back, unflinching, and then she was gone. The ride home was quiet. Nathan sat beside his father in the car, staring out the window, his thoughts still catching up to everything that had happened. After a while, his father spoke. "I don't want you to worry about this anymore," he said. "She's out of our lives now." Nathan hesitated. "Do you think she ever really cared about us?" Richard exhaled slowly. "I think she cared about what we could give her," he admitted. "But real love? No, I don't think so." Nathan nodded, as if deep down he had already known the answer. When they pulled into the driveway, Richard turned to him. "Things are going to change, Nathan," he said. "I promise you that." Nathan met his father's eyes, and, for the first time in what felt like forever, he actually believed him. The nightmare was over, and finally he was safe.